Right, welcome. So this session that we're running today on how to integrate planning into outdoor learning into your planning for the curriculum is the second time I've done this. This is a repeat of some training I've been doing over the year. It was a 20-session course, which is still ongoing. So what we're trying to do is to help you not just to think about outdoor learning as a pedagogy, but ways in which you can make it more systemic within your school planning, so that whenever you're teaching any new topic, it's something that you're going to make sure that you integrate. And the way to do that is to try to think about it as a way in which you teach, not just an add-on. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you. This PowerPoint will be sent to you as soon as I've done the recording. I will send you this PowerPoint. If I've got a Hub email account for you, then that's brilliant. It's a lot easier to share on that. So if I haven't got your Hub account, as your email that you actually book through Eventbrite, can you put that in the chat as well privately? And then I can make sure I email it to you through Hub, because it's a lot easier to share. If you haven't got a Hub email account, that's fine. What I do is I will share it with you on WeTransfer. So when you get a WeTransfer, it will tell you have a file. You need to download it because there is a limited time for it to be available. I think it's like 4 or 5 weeks. If you find in the future you've lost it, just email me and I will send you the PowerPoint again. When you see the PowerPoint, I will share it with you now. The first page of the PowerPoint will have this front screen here, and then at the bottom it will say, for a recording of this, click here. When you click on here, you will get sent to a YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, which has got a private area, which you'll be able to see the recording there. So you'll have it embedded in the PowerPoint. Right, so what we're going to try and do with this session is trying to empower you to understand that you can implement outdoor learning in all aspects of the new curriculum, covering all of the AOLEs, and trying to make it something that you do as a rule whenever you're planning, and not just, as I said, as an add-on. Bit of housekeeping, as I've said, you probably all know all this by now, but if you want to make sure you're not shown in the video, chances are the video will only have me in it really, but if you want to turn your screen on, please feel free to do that. Please keep your microphones mute. We will be doing a breakout room near the end so that you can talk to other people about what they do at the moment, ways in which you can adapt based on the training that I've given you today, and getting ideas from other teachers as well. During the breakout rooms, please do turn on your microphones and your cameras. You will not be filmed during the breakout room, so that bit will not go onto the recording. So a lot of you have already used the chat function, which is great. So if you haven't, please feel free to put your information on there in terms of either your Hub email account direct to me, so I can then email you. If somebody has also booked you onto Eventbrite, so there is no email address for you directly and you want it sent to another email address, then please put that onto the chat as well, so I can send it to the right email address. In the chat box, we might ask some questions as well, so feel free to comment. You can also have chats in there if you want to talk about things. If anything you like the sound of and you want more information, I do apologize if I don't get your question at the chat, but there will be a point at the end where we will have opportunities for questions. I've got my contact details here, so when you get the copy of the PowerPoint, you can have a look on my website if you want to follow up anything. You can also contact me through social media, through Twitter, through Facebook, and also there is a email address, obviously. And on my website, there's also an inquiry form as well. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to be considering, first of all, why we need to bother integrating outdoor learning into your planning, and why it can't just be something either spontaneous or something you just do because it's still teaching. And I'm going to give you some tools to help you to integrate outdoor learning into your planning, thinking about all aspects of planning. So we're going to start with our long-term plans, how to choose your topic to consider trying to integrate a higher level of outdoor learning or just some aspect of outdoor learning. Looking at the medium-term planning, thinking about how you can adapt your planning sheets that you're probably using to identify what skills and curriculum content you want to cover, and how to make sure that there is outdoor learning opportunities embedded in that. Then we're going to also go through some short-term planning. So when you're actually planning a session, how can you integrate outdoor learning into that, either doing a whole outdoor learning session, so what should you include when you're planning a whole outdoor learning session, or what to consider when you're doing an outdoor session in part of a larger topic or a larger session, which is a bit indoor and outdoor, so a bit of transition as well. I'm also going to go through some examples of planning forms that you might use at the moment or might have used in the past, and just to give you some ideas of how to adapt them to make sure that you're considering outdoor learning when you're undertaking your planning. I'm going to go through a whole range of those because people plan in very different ways, and I'm going to critique each different one in terms of the way in which you integrate outdoor learning into the planning sheet. I'm also going to go further onto using beyond a planning sheet and the ways in which I plan, which is very different, I think, probably to most of you, because I only teach outdoors, and then on to what I think of as like the next stage in terms of outdoor learning planning, which is much more freer. You have to be very confident for this, but it will hopefully give you ideas that you can take away with you. So none of these planning forms will be perfect for you, but if you take and pick and mix from each different one, hopefully you can make sure that you are embedding your outdoor learning in it. And then last of all, I'm going to go through how to actually plan learning sessions as a kind of blow-by-blow account, but also things about like unplanned outdoor learning and how can we make sure we make the best use of that. So I hope those are things that are going to be useful for you. So starting at the top, we're gonna, if you actually think back to when forest school started, so where there was kind of a push for outdoor learning, it tended to be looking at many of those soft skills. And now with our new curriculum, it would be great that we could all go back into looking at soft skills and just say, right, we're going outdoors, it's going to be great for us. But realistically, when we've got Estin coming in, we need to know why we're actually doing this outdoor learning. And it's only going to be functional, really, if you've thought about it at the planning stage. So, oh, sorry. Far. If you're planning to teach outside, you need to just remember that everything you do inside can be transferable outside. So there is no need for it to be anything too complicated, but you just need to be really sure of what you're trying to achieve outside. And why you're putting it into your planning is because you are brilliant at planning. This is every teacher's superpower. They are amazing at planning. So therefore, if we use that and just bring the outdoors into that, then we know that you're going to be doing a fantastic job. So when we make sure it's in our planning, we are ensuring that we're going to make the best use of time. In Key Stage 2 especially, most teachers tell me that their biggest barrier to going outdoors is their lack of time. They have to cover so much curriculum content that they don't have the time to go outside. And however, that seems to me completely counter, because when you're outside, you should be teaching and covering curriculum content, unless it's playtime. And if you're not doing it effectively so that you need to repeat it inside, then maybe you're not doing it effectively, and maybe you're not planning it to use that outdoor space at the right moment and time in the content of the topic. So using the best time outdoors means that you train your learners, you're getting outside, you know what you're doing out there, you've located the best location within your outdoor area to do it, and you know that they've got the prior knowledge because they're at that point in the topic for you to cover it. So you're either using it as an inspiration at the beginning, test concepts at the end, or teaching them in the middle. So you know that your time is going to be well spent outside. You don't have to then repeat things when you come back in. It also ensures that you're using the outdoors to bring the curriculum to life. If we want these lifelong learners, these ambitious lifelong learners, then they need to realize that you don't stop learning when you go outside the classroom, because once they've left school, unless they're teachers, there will not be another classroom. So they need to be able to continue learning in all areas. So being outside offers them that real life experience, so they know that, that stuff that I was taught inside, I can do this outside. This is actually useful. And then being outside can really make that come to life. It also helps you link and complement the indoor learning. And that only happens if you plan it. If you're going outside and you do an activity and it's completely disparate to what you're teaching them indoors, then you're not using the grounds to the best of its use. You're also not using your time effectively. So if you know, right, I'm going to teach them this topic inside this aspect of maths, and then I know that if I take them outside and I can actually test them, I can assess them on their understanding by doing this outside, then you know that it's all relevant to what you've done in the inside, and you can actually use it as an assessment for learning, and then it'll bring learners on. It also provides relevance and depth to the curriculum in ways that are really difficult to do indoors. So there's a lot of topics that you're trying to teach in your four walls, and you're very, different to the real world environment, which is a school. You come outside and you're almost saying, right, I've told you about the contents, the context. This is what it's like in the real world, and the outside really provides you with that opportunity to bring that relevance in and that depth that's more difficult inside a classroom, which is very controlled. You also having these positive educational impacts, and they found through a lot of studies that these positive educational impacts are especially strong when you go outdoors, but only if they're an integral part of the structured curriculum. So going outside has a great impact. However, if you plan the outdoor learning, integrating in with the indoor learning, it has a far greater impact. And those educational impacts they found that usually go beyond what you've taught them outside. It carries on through topics when you come back inside. And outdoor learning can also be used as a tool to achieve your existing school policies and linking it with your school vision. So a lot of schools now in their SDPs or their SEPs are bringing in outdoor learning as a priority, whether it be to increase health and well-being, or based on the COVID pandemic to try and encourage those learners to be more resilient or to work better in teams. They're trying to bring the outdoors that way. So if you're planning it, then you can evidence it in your SDP of what you're trying to achieve. You can get funding because it's in your SDP. There you can go to your governors to get funding for it. So realistically, if you've got it in your SDP, it's got to be identified within your planning. And therefore, when ESTIN come or your local authority challenge advisors come, you can show you've got evidence of what's happening in your classroom because it's in your planning, and you've seen that as an evidence for your STP. So learning outside the classroom, this is a quote from 2008 from Ofsted. Now, I know that's quite a long time ago, but it really rings true because it says that the most successful outdoor learning or learning outside the classroom, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably here because learning outside the classroom can be anything beyond your school. So that's your grounds, your local learning area, going on school trips, residentials, that covers the whole remit. So if it's successfully planned, then it can really bring out the best of your curriculum. So if you integrate it into long-term curriculum plans, that means thinking about the topics that you're doing, your medium-term planning, as well as your short-term planning, then you know you're going to make the best use of it and you can really bring to life that curriculum that you've got. And of course, you're engaging with your learners then as well, because you can see how they cope outside and see whether you need to adapt or change or increase the challenge or put some more progression in there. Now, the report that this came in recommended that schools make sure that they ensure curriculum planning includes sufficient, well-structured opportunities for all their learners to engage in learning outside the classroom as a key integrated element of their experience. And that you should not just leave it at that. So that's the first step, obviously encouraging them to go outside, putting it into the planning, getting it as a really engaged integral element. But then you need to maximize the impact on learners by looking at the impact, by evaluating it, seeing how they've achieved, looking at their personal development and well-being. So realistically, learning outside the classroom and outdoor learning, integrating into your planning, it really should also be integrated into your monitoring as well. So in terms of monitoring what's going on with your learners, so tracking, seeing which how well they're coping with their health and well-being. So bringing it into all aspects is going to make sure that it's fully embedded as well. So it really is part of one of those pedagogies, not just an add-on. So learning outside the classroom is not an addition to the curriculum. And if you think of it as an addition, then it is just a waste of time because it's going to add to your workload. But it should be integral. So it should be a part of your teaching and learning. And to make sure this happens, it's really important to build on the learner's outdoor experience and then add that to their indoor experience to get that holistic. And that means putting it into the schemes of work, into your curriculum planning, and also feedback into the students and feedback into your planning on a daily basis. Now, if the context of your outdoor learning and you're going to focus on the curriculum, then you need to think about where you're going to do this. You're going to say, is it just the school grounds, or are you going to go to your local learning area? But if you're also planning in that far afield, don't forget you've got beyond that, and to make sure you've got things that might happen on a regular basis, maybe even off-site, things like forest school. You might have school visits, field trips, outings, residentials, all that. As soon as you start thinking outdoors and outside the classroom, all that should come into it as well. We're not going to go through that aspect in too much detail, but whenever I'm talking about integrating outdoor learning into your planning and give you some ideas, don't think it's just the outside in your school playground. It's going to be anywhere outside of school. So you might bring in some great trips and opportunities there as well. Now I'm going to go through how to integrate outdoor learning into your planning. And the best thing to do is to ask some questions while you are planning, or when you're actually thinking about your planning framework, especially if you're changing it, which at the moment a lot of people are changing for the new curriculum. So see, these are some suggested questions that would help you. Think about which experiences that you're planning to have with your learners will have more impact on learning if they're done outside. So I'm not thinking, look at your learning and planning and go, right, we're just going to take it all outside, because some things are not going to be better outside. They're going to be more difficult. They're not going to improve by providing this outdoor experience. You need to identify and highlight the ones that will be, so that when you're outdoors, it's going to be beneficial and it's going to add to your teaching. You also need to think about how can learning outdoors enhance and deepen the learning within curriculum areas. Again, you don't want to be just repeating what you taught them inside without adding something else. Are you making it more real by giving them real life problem solving? For example, if you were teaching them area inside and they've measured every area of everything in school within an inch of its life, you take them outside, you're starting to increase the scale of things. So you can do the yard, you can start give them problem solving activities. So they've got reasoning tasks within the maths. So for example, we want to cover the yard in grass. We want to turf it, okay? We need to know the area so we can calculate how many turfs we need to buy, and we need to put the cost in for that. So you can then give them a reasoning task, but the end result is they still need to understand area, be able to calculate area, and use the right tools for the job, the large scale tools such as tape measures, to actually undertake it. And that means that you are deepening and enhancing their experience in that curriculum area. Think about which experiences are best suited for a combination of indoor and outdoor learning. Now, foundation phase are really good at this, with those continuous flows of going inside and outside the classroom. But there shouldn't be a reason why the secondaries, the Key Stage 2 can't do that, unless you've got real issues with getting outside. Your Key Stage 2 students are probably more independent, obviously depending on your cohort. But if they are independent and you have the access to the outside space from your classroom, then thinking about, right, well, maybe once they've understood a topic that I've been teaching them inside, can I add a challenge by saying, right, you've got that now. Here, take this outdoor challenge to test this concept, go out and do it outside so you can prove to me that you've really got it. Excuse me. So a combination of indoor and outdoor is going to help. So then you can concentrate on the ones who are still struggling inside, and they are going to test in a more challenging way their understanding of the concept in the outdoor environment. How can learning indoors best be consolidated, progressed, or enhanced using the outdoors? So these are some of the ways in which we can use outdoor learning. So if it's consolidating it, then obviously you need some pre-teaching, some prior knowledge before you start taking them outside. If it's progressed, if you're starting a topic or if you're teaching something outdoors, you need to consider how can we actually move the learners along with that activity. That usually comes in with a lot of questioning and really good questioning skills. And how can we enhance the experience? So thinking about the indoor environment and the indoor teaching that you've done, has it been kind of two-dimensional because you are limited by what you've got in terms of experiences inside? So we can't visit trees and rainforests inside, no matter how brilliant your displays are. So if we move that outside, we can really enhance that. That goes for literacy as well. So you've got books that they're exploring inside and getting inspiration. But however, if you take them outside into the real environment, the inspiration is there for them to find adjectives, to think about backdrops to stories, even finding characters, talking about trails and journeys. So you can enhance the experience by taking them outside. And then lastly, the outdoors is not split into AOLEs or topics or subjects at all. It's completely cross-curricular. So taking your learning outside usually means that you have a cross-curricular linking, and that goes within topics and across topics. So that really means that you can test every aspect of a topic with the outside. So if you're sending them out looking at maths outside, you could you could cover all things, measurements, geometry, so we can look at angles, we can look at shapes. All those can be measured outside or tested outside because they're all out there. But we can also link those together with humanities and science investigations and geography inquiries and literacy. So outside, it gives you that opportunity to actually be much broader than just the one topic or AOLE that you are planning to cover. So thinking about how outdoor learning can deliver your learning objectives is key. And of course, that's key to everything. If you don't know your learning objectives, you don't know why you're doing what you're doing with your learners, then it's very difficult to know if you've been successful. So these are just a few ways in which you can identify outdoor learning as a good place to cover your outdoor learning objectives. So thinking about some simple ones, you could go out at the start of a topic and use nature as an inspiration as a starting point for a lesson. So this could be on a small scale that you're talking about inspiration for a literacy task. So you want to get them to write a story and you want to have a backdrop for that story. So you want them to describe the landscape. So taking them for a walk around the school grounds, identifying adjectives, good describing words, good backdrops, good alliteration, and then come in and use that inspiration to start writing your story. On a broader scale, you could start your topic using the outdoors as inspiration. Now, I do a lot of launch days. I know people do experience days or whatever you do to launch your topic. If you consider if that's all happening inside, and then you go on to do your epic planning, so you're everyone planning in class, is everyone's planning together based on that experience, which is a great opportunity. If they're all happening inside, chances are when you're planning, they will be thinking of answering those questions using the indoors as their vehicle. However, if you just thought, right, some of those activities on that launch day or that marketplace or that experience day, if we just put some of them outside or did some outdoor things as part of that inspirational day, then when we're doing our planning together, chances are they'll go, oh, we did that outside. So therefore, I need to be outside to understand this concept or to ask this question or answer this question. So just bringing it in at a certain point allows you to be much more easily led in terms of using outdoor learning throughout the topic because you've started some of it within the topic at the beginning of the topic as well. If you're starting out with outdoor learning and you feel there's a bit of lack of confidence there, then sometimes it's just easier for you to just complete your lesson outside rather than inside. Now, on the first step of that ladder, if you think about outdoor learning, would be an activity that you are doing inside. You literally just go outside with your pieces of paper or with your worksheets or with your books, if you're reading. So you're literally just moving locations. Now that's got its place. That's great, especially if the weather's nice. But sometimes just a little tweak from that is still just taking your lesson outside, but you're using the outdoors to help you. So it could be that when you're drawing inside, instead of drawing outside, you use nature as your subject for drawing outside. It could be that you're doing a science investigation inside, but take it outside because it's much easier to be messy outside. You have to, clear up after yourself most of the time. You've also got things for technology. So for designing, you've got places to hang things up. So you've got high areas. You've got a more different structures that you can use as inspiration for building or to utilize. This picture here on the right is an activity that I do, which is called Build a Tree. And it involves each member of the class being given a different role within the tree. So you've got your cambium in the middle, you've got your xylem, your phloem, you've got the roots down the bottom, you can see them lying down. At the very outside, you've got your bark, and each one has a job to do. They say what they do, they have sound effects, etc. Now, there is absolutely no reason why I cannot do this activity in the hall. We need space, so it's got to be the hall, but I could have done that in the hall with them. But this activity is all about trees. And if you think about doing that in the hall, it doesn't really make sense. Whereas out here, they're surrounded by trees. Whenever you're talking about them, you can point at a tree. And therefore, it does actually make it much more real. I heard a story once about a forest school activity that was taking place, but the weather was too bad, so they relocated to the hall. So this is almost the opposite of this. So they relocated to the hall and they thought, oh, what should we do? They said, oh, I know, let's play hopscotch. Kids love doing that outside. So they rolled out a hopscotch mat with the counters. And somebody who was observing them said, okay, so what's the learning objective of this? And they're like, oh, we're playing hopscotch. It's like, okay, yeah, but what would you want people to achieve in terms of undertaking that activity outside? And it's like, well, it's really good for, number. Yeah, but they're already out there. So you don't really have to do it apart from count. Yeah, well, what was the best things when you played hopscotch? Well, it was all about finding the right stone. It's like, well, you've just taken that away because you've given them counters. So suddenly having it indoors removes any aspect of inspiration, making it at all interesting. It's just a very boring, controlled environment. So sometimes thinking, right, we're doing this in the hall, but actually, would this be better outside? We're in the hall because we need space, but there's even more space outside. So again, you're not adapting your activity, you're just relocating, and that will bring hopefully an added bonus to the experience, and a lot of your learners, especially if they're reluctant learners, might actually engage a bit more. Another way is to use natural materials to deliver the learning. Now that could be, especially if the weather's bad, that you go out for 5 minutes, collect loose parts. So loose parts, I mean, things that you can pick up like sticks, leaves, stones, twigs, bring them in. So you're bringing the outside in, and then you can use those for things like maths. So in algebra, they can be parts of the sum, or you can make the, you can use the shapes as well to make the letters for foundation phase. You could also go out to collect items to find metaphors or adjectives. So you're using that as inspiration in the natural materials. You can also go outside and use nature to inspire you. And it could be that the weather is something that helps you experience something, especially if you've got stories. If you're going out to collect, if you're talking about a story which is set in a certain time of year or a certain climate, you're going out and you actually read it in those conditions, then it's a real proper experience. There's some great stories all about going to the South Pole. And if you've got a really freezing cold day and they sit out there and hear just a few pages of that, they're going to be getting really cold. Now, obviously you don't want to push it, but then when they come inside, just think about their description of what it's like to be cold in that story. It's much more meaningful than them trying to think about it in a lovely, warm, air-conditioned, very boiling hot classroom going, right, it's freezing cold, the wind is howling. It's like, no, it's not, it's boiling hot and I can hardly breathe. So thinking about the time of year, linking a topic to that is really important. And thinking if you have got stories and books that you're using, again, linking them to the environments that you've got. A lot of people come to me and say, oh, I go, oh, okay, what's your topic for the next term? You know, tell me what it is and we'll think of some outdoor learning ideas. And they're doing something like Africa. And I always worry that they're doing Africa when there's nobody African in their class or with links to Africa at all. It's the wrong time of year. It's not even hot. And their outdoor space has got nothing that relates to African environments in the slightest. I'm thinking, okay, why are you doing Africa? You know, you've got to think about your Cynefin for the new curriculum. You've got to think about your local learners area. If there's no African link there, is that really the best topic for you? They've got so many countries in the world. So thinking about topical topics as well, that are topical to your learning and your learners as well, is important. The next thing you can do is to test the understanding of concepts that you have taught them inside. For example, measuring on a large scale. So just using a different bit of equipment. I've been doing a research project with a local school who've been looking at the impact of outdoor learning on maths. And we've had two groups of learners of mixed ability, one all with the same prior knowledge. They've both been taught, we started with area. They've both been taught the practicalities of it in the classroom together. Then one group I took outside and we did some outdoor learning activities, testing their understanding of the concept. And the teacher took another group to the inside and did the same problem solving activity. Now, the group that came out with me, I just asked them to tell me what the area of the yard was. That was it, nothing else. And on the ground, there was all these equipment. There was rulers, there was meter rulers, there was tape measures, trundle wheels, string, chalk. And they could help themselves and they had to problem solve. Now, there were some amazing mathematicians there who were really good, who have been doing trigonometry in year 6. They have been so good in the classroom. They came outside, they heard the problem, and they had no idea what to do. They were brilliant mathematicians on paper. As soon as they were given a practical challenge that involved very simple maths that they understood, they could not actually relate. They couldn't actually apply the knowledge they've done inside. And if we are trying to create lifelong learners, they have to be able to use the knowledge that you've taught them in the classroom in the real world. So unless you can test that, you don't know to go back and say, right, okay, you don't get this. We need to go back in the classroom, or we need to stay outside the classroom and test this more outside. So giving them that opportunity is really, really important. You've also got lots of opportunities within the AOLEs to bring things to life by going outdoors, such as the statistics in What Matters Statement 4 in the maths and numeracy. That's all about statistics, and that's collecting data and presenting that in graphs. If you want to do that, go outside and collect that data. It's much more meaningful. Doesn't matter if it fits patterns or the graphs look weird. That's much more meaningful than giving them this data that means nothing to them. Things also in literacy and the literacy learning, language and communication. Instructional writing, again, if they're writing instructions to follow a trail round your school grounds, there is a reason for them to do this, more than just writing instructions to write a menu, which they probably aren't actually going to do, or cook something. You've also got things like looking at patterns in what you've taught them in school. So in the science and the technology AOLE, you're showing them about growing patterns in plants and how animals prefer certain habitats. You can then go outside and see if we're right. We've just found out that plants need light to grow. Let's go and see if we can see any plants growing in the dark or growing better in the light areas. We can measure our beans and see if they're better in a certain area. We can actually prove if what we were told in class was right, or question it, which is an even better thing to do. We can also use modeling. There's a whole load of modeling within the new curriculum. And if we model things like the circulatory system, there's something you can't show them, but you can actually be the parts of the circulatory system. You can be food chains. You can find animals eating each other, or you can see what eats what. So it really does bring it all together, these concepts that you're trying to show inside. And there's lastly, this I think is like, it's kind of building on from the understanding of concepts. using the outdoors to exemplify concepts. So you teach them about geographical landforms or geographical processes inside. And then when you come outside, you can look for those landforms. Now, it might be you haven't got a river or coastline or mountains in your school grounds, but there's the local learning area as well. There's also so many skills that really need to be done outside to be tested and to exemplify the purpose of this. For example, coordinates. So coordinates, grid referencing, you can do that with 2 fingers on a piece of paper, but if you could come out and look at your school grounds and use grid referencing on your school grounds, you can get to them to stand in the right place to see if you can understand it. Using compasses, you really can't do that in the inside, you need to come outside. There's also lots of ways in which we can challenge them and try and give them some reason to understand some of the maths concepts that you're doing. So challenge them to re-tarmac the yard, undertaking science investigations that will give them the answers they don't know. Nothing frustrates me more than finding out that children have found out that penguins huddle because it keeps them warmer, when they knew that before they did the investigation. Whereas if we go outside and find out, why do the leaves at the bottom of a tree, why are they smaller than the ones at the top? Or are they smaller? I don't know. That's the whole point. I don't know. So that we find out the answer to that. If they don't know the answer to the experiment, that's much more meaningful than if they did in the first place. Talking about plants and predicting how well they grow in different areas or with different conditions. And also we can challenge them to find out things like calculating the size of trees, something that they can never actually measure because it's too big. So problem solving and looking at formulas for that as well. Right, I'm now going to go through ways in which you can embed outdoor learning into your long-term planning, your medium planning, your weekly and your daily planning. I'm just going to have a drink first. So before we look at some ways to embed the outdoors into your planning, I just first of all want you to think about how you choose your topics at the moment. Now, with the new curriculum, the topic range has gone through the roof. Some amazing topics are coming out, and I am all actually very interested to know how you choose your topics. So if you do want to put it into the chat, that would be fantastic. But just have a quick think. How do you choose your topics, especially now, because chances are you are not repeating topics you've done on a 3-yearly cycle for the last God knows how many years. So you thinking really outside the box, which is fantastic. So why we're going to think about this way is because if your long-term plan and the topics you've got within those have some really great links to outdoor learning, then you know that you're going to embed outdoor learning in your planning, because it's very difficult to teach some topics without going outside. So these are going to give you some ideas. Now, this is from a website, and I'll just let you know that I've got a whole resource that I'll show you on the last slide, which is a Padlet. A Padlet is a way in which you can link it could be documents and internet sites. You put it all on a big website, and you can sort it into different columns. And this covers all of the AOLEs and all aspects of outdoor learning. And within that, there are some ways in which you can choose your topics. And this is one that you can then click on, and it gives you some ideas. However, if you want to make sure that outdoor learning is some key, especially if it's in your school development plan, to your topics, then what you really should be thinking about is not what topic have we done last, what topic do I like, what topic have we got the resources for, but really you should think about your local environment and think, right, how can I use this outdoor environment to inspire and teach the topics that I've chosen? And obviously with a new curriculum, you've got huge numbers of them. So making them relevant to your learners, that means they need to be relevant to their local environment, to their Cynefin. And if you're not getting inspiration from your outdoor space, then sometimes it's very hard to go, right, okay, how am I going to get the Greeks into my school ground outdoor learning? How am I going to do that? So if you're using that as inspiration for your topics, then you will probably get some really good links there already. Now, if That does mean you need to know your either school grounds or your local learning area pretty well. And that just doesn't mean today. There's things in the past as well. So a bit of advice I would give you is consider, if you have, talking to a local historian to find out about local areas, to see what it was like in the past, especially around your school and school, within walking distance of 30 minutes. See if you can bring that alive in your topics so that it's much more meaningful and it's really relevant to your learners. This is another idea. If you haven't got a historian, there's a lot of online maps, old maps that you can use to find of your local school area. Now, this is my local school. This is Nelston. You can see it there. That is not the school now. That is now the houses next door to the school, which is called the old schoolhouse. So immediately we can see there's a bit of history there because that's not the school. But also we can see that there's the ruins of a church, which are actually where the school is being built now. So looking at old maps, you might find that you've got remains. You might have a old battlefield nearby. You might have churches or burial mounds. And if you're looking at these maps, then you might get some ideas. The landscape also makes it really clear as well. Why are those lumps and bumps in our school grounds? Is that building work, or have we got 3,000 dead bodies living under there? Now, again, if it's real and it's they're Carnarvon, then fantastic. But if not, it's still inspiration for a story. Why, thinking about these lumps and bumps, who made them? What are they there for? Give you an example. This is Warwick School Foundation. Now, they were moving locations. They're in England. So they were moving locations from one site on the right here to across the road to expand. And as they were digging the site, they found the largest Roman villa in the whole of the UK that was built there. Now, they decided they were going to preserve the Roman villa by building the school on top of it. So that school now has the biggest Roman villa in the UK underneath it. And just using that as the inspiration for so many topics would just be really real for these learners. So what I think about is just have a think about what might be hiding under your school or within your school grounds. So think Time Team, Schools Edition. It could be you could start digging in your school grounds and find things. And usually you do find bits of clay or coins or whatever. But again, doesn't actually matter whether you find it or not. It's just that inspiration for your topic that makes it more meaningful. Also think about the weather and the conditions when you plan your topic. So many schools take habitats in the summer and things like the Olympics in the summer. They do rivers in the autumn. They do seasons in the autumn. So some of your topics are already embedded into this nature's calendar. But also think about how the outdoors can help, not hinder, the teaching of a topic. And there's a lot of celebrations which are usually linked to seasonality. So your RE topics are linked to those celebrations. So they will be relevant usually to an outdoor element. So thinking about those as a guide to cover your topics. Also, a lot of schools are using questions as topics. So instead of just having the topic title, it might be a question. So consider, is it the right time of year to answer that question? So some activities, especially if they're associated with a natural environment, are influenced by the seasonal variation in nature. So for example, life cycles. So life cycles in a pond or in a meadow or in a woodland habitat are very active in the spring, and in the summer they slow down. In the winter they're non-active. So thinking about why nature is special as a question. If you were trying to answer that in the winter time when most of nature is asleep or dormant, it'd be really quite tricky. If you were talking about farming or something to do with growing, again, you need to have the summer season for it to actually undertake, especially if you're going into the growing season and the cycles and you're going to maybe visit a farm. You don't want to go there and find that there's nothing going on because you've missed the season. Also, if you're growing things, you need to make sure that they don't all become ready for harvest in August because you're not in school. So a lot of things need to be planned in that way. Now, there is a powerful case that's been presented for outdoor learning in the classroom, that it is frequent, continuous, and progressive. So for example, your activities should not be standalone, and you shouldn't leave it until the summer months and cancel it whenever the weather is not very good or is inclement. Or for example, Esting come along and you don't want to be doing an outdoor lesson because it was planned. But deciding when to go outside the classroom should really be informed by what you want your learners to achieve. So for example, I do not agree that there is no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. Anyone who has been outside in really bad weather with the best clothing knows that that is not true. If you want to teach your learners a specific thing and the weather is appalling outside, and you take them out anyway, and you expect them to learn, they will learn that it's very cold and wet and miserable and they want to be inside. And how much time has that been of yours wasted? If, however, you think, right, no, too miserable, right, weather's better tomorrow, we'll do it tomorrow, and you go out and it works brilliantly, then fantastic. But you need to be adaptable. But you think about the weather, how can it be working with us? If we're going out and it's cold and it's wet and we're using it as inspiration for writing something, great. If we're going to investigate where the water goes when it rains, great. If we're looking at temperature differences on different days, great. But if we're going out and standing in cold, wet and listening to some instruction that could have been done inside and collecting something on a piece of paper that's turned into mush, then it's not working. So thinking about having this balance of indoor and outdoor activities that you have planned into your whole curriculum, and again, being adaptable based on the weather conditions you've got, and also consider, moving things around. A lot of people do have set days that they go outside. The weather doesn't fit with that. So you do need to be, plan for the week so that you can move things around as you can. Also, try and think about your local providers as well. They might provide some indoor activities for your outdoor learning in the winter months. So going to museums, libraries, theatres, art galleries, those may be things that you think, right, okay, let's put them into the winter months, because then we know that we're going to have a great activity that's inspiring, but not really weather dependent. These are some topic ideas that I've gleaned from many of the schools that I've been working with and things. So, and I know schools are not all going down the topic road, but some are going down like the four purposes road, or you're doing it by AOLEs, or you're looking at what the pupils want to learn, and it's driven by skills. So some schools are actually allowing their learners to decide their topics. So it really depends on where you are on the journey to the new curriculum. But whichever way you're going, the same is true to draw on the outdoors as a driver to pick activities suitable for the time of year. And a very simple way to include consideration of the outdoors with that is when you're topic planning is to do the planning outside. So either at your planning meeting, if you have a planning meeting, if you've got a 2-phase or 3-phase form entry, or when you're doing planning with your learners. So if you've got your launch day sorted, and then next day you start doing the epic planning, is there a group, maybe some of your learners who can go outside and do some planning out there? Or can you go outside and do it? I did this with some teachers I was teaching the other day. We'd done a lovely inset, and it's like, right, we need to put this into our planning now, right? Okay, let's plan. And we sat outside and did it. And they all said, I've never planned outside before. And I thought, well, if the weather's nice and you want to do outdoor learning, then why not plan it outside? Again, you want to make sure the weather is helping you and not hindering you. So medium-term planning now. So we're going to move from picking our topics onto our medium-term planning. So we've got our topics sorted. And a great way of introducing and setting the scene for using outdoor learning in your planning is by using it in your launch day or your experience day or immersive day, or whatever you use to inspire the pupil voice and input into the start of your topic and the rest of your planning. So again, consider how the outdoors can be used to immerse your learners in the experience. So expose them to the real aspect of the topic. Now, one thing you could do is have an experience day. So actually go off site, go and have a field visit or a visit to another location, and that's the start of your topic. Now, just remember that the topic launch is to whet their appetite and get them asking questions. You're not aiming to answer all the questions. You're just getting the learners engaged enough in the topic to ask what they want to learn. Now, if you go on an experience day for your topic launch that's done by an external provider, so if you go to a museum or if you go on a field trip, really important that the person running it or leading it understands the aim of it. You don't want them to answer all the questions. You don't want everything to be in a nice package bow that at the end it's like, yes, we've done that topic. You want them to come away going, oh, I want to know more. I want to know more. I want to know more about this. So make sure that you talk to your provider and you don't get them to just give you the field trip or the work, the experience that they want to give you. Make sure you've inputted into that. Now I'm going to go through an example of a launch day. So I run launch days for schools and I plan them, and I usually plan, you know, up to about 10 different activities covering the whole school every year group. And here is an example of a launch day that I planned a couple of years ago before COVID. And it was for May the Force Be With You, which was the topic they were doing. That was their topic title. And it was focusing on the science and technology AOLE and the forces element of that. Now, just looking at this planning form that I did for it, you can see that the second thing I thought of once I had thought of the activity I was going to do was where it was going to be undertaken. And for me, that was key. Apart from the logistics of it, how is this going to work? If you've got a whole school moving around, trying to have new experiences, you really don't want them all in their classroom and you moving the stuff from classroom to classroom. You want to spread out people as much as possible. So going outside just helps the logistics of this. But also, we're talking about aspects of force, you know, force outside. There's so many things that we use it for. So it just made sense to have a lot of it outside. Now, if your starter day or your launch day experience has some outdoor elements, not only are you giving them a great overall experience by expanding your area, you're also prompting your learners to realize that the outdoors is a place to learn and discover anyway as well. So therefore, they're hopefully going to consider alternative locations for their ongoing learning. So we're making these lifelong learners again. It also should hopefully provide them with inspirations from different environments to ask even more questions and very different questions to those from inside the building. Because if you think about it, if you ask a learner a question and they don't know the answer, they usually go, and they look around, usually at your learning walls, to try and get some inspiration. So if they were doing that outside, then they might get inspiration from outside to think about the questions they have for their planning. So it's a great way to try and inspire them to think about more than just what you've placed on the walls for them. So an example of a launch experience. So if you don't want to, because this one requires obviously a lot of equipment and a lot of learners, a lot of teachers involvement. So I provide all of the equipment for this and all of the ideas and instructions for each one. And I'm just running one of them and all the teachers are running the rest of them. So a lot of coordination and organization involved. If you don't want to go quite that far, then obviously it could just be that you go on a visit. So you're going to a local park or a local beach, woodland or a riverside, so somewhere near you. And always think, if you're going to go for less than a day, so you're going to go for a session, which I think of as a morning or afternoon, make sure your walk is only a maximum of half an hour from the school. That gives you half an hour to get there, half an hour to get back if someone needs the toilet. You've got an hour and a half then to do your activity, half an hour to get back, and you're back in time for lunch. If you do more than half an hour's walk, then it does mean you really need to bring a packed lunch, which is fine, but you need to integrate toileting then in as well, and hand washing. Also, you've got all of the learning outside the classroom places like museums, you know, all those opportunities there for inspiration. And again, letting them explore, letting them read, letting them ask questions, because that's the whole point of it. But it could also be that you're just using your school grounds. So if you don't have great school grounds, that doesn't matter really. If you do need more space, then think about an open bit of space that you could go to, that you could go and maybe use. It could be a field for a local farmer, it could be a park. Just make sure that you've done a quick rec that nobody's playing football there while you're going to use it. Quite a lot of schools, there was a whole trend recently of everybody having an alien invasion in their school grounds, which was quite interesting, which is a great opportunity. And again, that's something that over time you could build that into lots of aspects of your AOLE, and it could be something that you revisit in the future, but also think about, right, okay, what went well with that? Obviously we had the school grounds, but did we make the best use of the school grounds to follow up with that topic? So once you've undertaken your topic launch, hopefully using the outdoors in some way, you need to continue to prompt the use of the outdoors when you're doing your planning. So when you're doing your epic planning with your learners, thinking about how do we make sure that they remember the outdoors is a place. So obviously it depends on how you undertake your epic planning to find a way to prompt your learners to use the outdoors. But it could be that some of them do that epic planning outside on a bench. It could be that you just ask them when they come up with a question, something like, where do you think the best place would be to find that out? It could be that you took some photos of outside places and say, oh, look, here's some ideas of places we could go and visit. Here's a local wood, here's some local houses. Another brilliant way of doing it is to use Google Earth and fly in to your school and see what's around and kind of go, oh, wonder what that bit of grass is. Oh, what's that tree there? Oh, what's that building there? And that sparks their imagination about their local area as well. You could also bring in materials, again, to provide them with some inspiration. Could be some loose parts, especially for foundation phase, things that relate to locations outside, so that they can ask questions about each thing and then agree where the best place would be to actually explore those questions. You should try also to take into account the way any outdoor activity project tends to grow. So if you're doing growing as your activity, or one of your subjects and topics, gets you to grow something, the seasonality is really important. But it might be that your planning time frame doesn't fit in with the growing time frame. You might be a large project. It could be a project that requires you to buy things and then order them, and they arrive, and then build something, and then upsell it, and then sell it. So that might be actually longer than a term. So sometimes you do need to be very adaptable in your medium term planning, that things actually will last longer than the term. Because of course, if their topic is set and they've got to a point where they're really into it, I've seen some great examples from schools where they're like, yeah, we were doing this topic, but there was just so much to do. We just carried on. We went past the end of term, we just carried on with it. And that's a brilliant way of being adaptable, including in your planning. You then carry on with the skills that you want them to learn. A useful tool if you're struggling to see the potential learning opportunities outdoors is this document from the OEAP. So the OEAP provides all the guidance for going usually further afield in terms of adventurous activities or field trips, but they've got some great resources online. So if you go to the OEAP website, you can see this, and it just identifies, it's not specifically linked to the curriculum for Wales, but it does identify some potential learning opportunities outdoors from all these different points of view. So again, if you're trying to think, oh, how's this going to work in, there's some great links there that you might see. So now what I see as key to integrating outdoor learning into your planning is really a prompt that considers where is the best place to undertake this activity. So whenever you're planning, when you're doing it, either with your learners or on your own or with your planning team, just think and ask yourself, where are the best places for learning outside the classroom activities to deliver your intended learning outcome? So it could be the best place for it is inside. That's fine. It could be the best place is to go further afield, go on a field trip. Right, we need to integrate that. It could be that it's in your school grounds. But just asking that question means that you've considered a location as an important aspect of your planning. Right, I'm now going to go through a few ideas of how you can adapt your medium-term planning tool or framework to prompt you to embed outdoor learning in whatever planning tool you use. So how do you make sure that this question here is asked when you're undertaking your planning? Now, these ideas are not in order of they're not in order of how good they are. They're in order of how embedded and how much you prioritize the outdoor learning. And for each one, I've ranked it so in terms of how much of a change it is from the way you plan now. So the first ones are not a lot of change. The last ones are going to be very different, probably from the way you plan. So these ideas will hopefully give you some ways of embedding learning into your planning, but feel free, if you like the way you've done it already, just take from anyone you like and put it into your planning frame. Do not reinvent the wheel. Okay, so if your planning system works for you, brilliant. What can you take from these ideas and put it into your planning to make sure you're including outdoor learning within it? Now, if you think, yeah, we're doing quite a lot of outdoor learning, it's pretty embedded, but I want to take it to the next level, then you might want to think about some of these very different planning methods at the end of the list. But please just take whatever fits into your school, and hopefully some of these will be useful for you. So this is the first way, the easiest way you can do it. You got your planning sheet. All you do is you highlight on your planning sheet which activities happen outside. And this can be done once you've done your planning process, so at the end of the planning process. Now, the good thing about this is it's really easy to add to your planning already, and it highlights literally the outdoor learning, but it also may be used already. You might be using it to identify core subjects or literacy or the DCF. So it means that it's going to be embedded because you're doing this stuff already and you're just highlighting it as in terms of where you might want to do it. The negatives on this is that you could just be playing lip service to the learning outside. So you're not making the best use of the resources that are found outside, just because you could be literally moving what you've got inside outside because you haven't highlighted enough. And also because it's done after you've done the planning, not during it, you might easily miss prompts to go outdoors, which you haven't thought about because you're just doing it inside. Another way of doing it that some schools are approaching are to actually add a box to their medium-term planning that says learning outside the classroom. So this is one possibility here for foundation, and it's another one there. Foundation phase, it could be that you're actually putting the location of the activity that you're doing, like your continuous provision. So it could be a section. It could be that you've got a section for skills to do with outdoors. So we've got learning outside the classroom here. So it could be that you're linking it to your AOLE, like your geography fieldwork. Now, the positive side of these is that when you're doing it when the planning takes place. So when you're doing your planning, that outdoor learning box is a prompt to encourage you to consider outdoor learning as a location for teaching. The negative side is, this is an example of one which is negative in terms of the outdoor learning aspect. It can be that you're doing it not as embedded as it could be. So these outdoor learning activities could actually be standalone. So I find a lot of schools that have this planning form with this box for outdoor learning, and they just put forest school in it every term. And then they feel that they've covered outdoor learning. It's like, yeah, we've done it. There, we do forest school once a week. We do Muddy Monday. There we go, outdoor learning, tick. But realistically, if you look at this school here, this intense here, so much information on these pages on what they're covering in terms of this project, which is on World War II, this topic. Second page, we have our learning outside the classroom box. Fantastic. However, it's not much in it really. They're basically going to go to a museum, and that's it. And if you think about it, all the things you could do for outdoor learning for that topic, you could build an air raid shelter in your school grounds. You could practice air raids. You could dig for victory. You could forage for wild food. You could make rush lights. You could think about what the school grounds was in World War II. There's so many outdoor activities you could have done. However, it looks like that these could be things that you've put in as an addition, as a last minute, instead of fully embedding it into the planning sheet. And it's especially happens here because this is at the back of the planning sheet. So it's not even in full sight. So a lot of you use A3 sheets, which are brilliant. Make sure if you've got a box, it's on that side. You don't have to turn it over and find the next bit. This outdoor learning action plan is something you might do if you were an outdoor learning coordinator. And I do suggest if you do have an outdoor learning as one of your priorities in your STP, you do have an outdoor learning coordinator in your school. This way, you're seeing where outdoor learning is happening across the curricula. And it provides you with a planning framework to identify opportunities which are routine. So what you're doing on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and a monthly basis. And you can see if reception are going out every day to the park, fantastic. If they're going out once every 3 years to the local area, then maybe that's not enough. If you're finding your year 6s and 7s are only going out once a term on a field trip, why aren't they going out routinely every week as well? And it's a great overview of what's happening and what isn't. Also, you can see progression within this as well. If you find that in school grounds doesn't increase or doesn't decrease at any point, then that's great. But if it's not increasing when you get to key stage 2, then you're not building on those skills that they've developed in foundation phase in outdoor learning. In terms of your complex visits, going on field trips, the ones that involve you filling in an evolve form, those ones, again, if you've got the same trip happening in year 1, 2, 3, 4, then wait a minute, how can I have progression if we're going to Folly Farm in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? Wait a minute, we should be going somewhere else when we get to the key stage 2, not Folly Farm again, because we've done it. And apart from if they've got some extra things there, what extra learning are we doing? How are we progressing? Same with residentials. So many schools, if you filled in that column, it would be year 6, go on their residential for a week in July. That means that you've got them from reception till June in their year 6, where you haven't taken them on residential. You're then expecting them in the last term of their school year in primary to suddenly be able to stay overnight. It'd be fantastic if you had progression in outdoor learning in terms of your residential experience, so that your 3-4s went on a long day and maybe spent an evening in school grounds, and then maybe the year 3s then stayed the night in the hall, and then year 4s went on a visit and stayed overnight, one night in a local area. Year 5s went for 2 or 3 nights somewhere a bit further away. Year 6 is further away still, so a big 2-hour, 3-hour bus drive. And then imagine the skills you're developing, especially the soft skills, over those residential experiences, that a lot of teachers come back from their year 6 residential and say, oh, little Johnny, I had no idea he had these skills. Unfortunately, he's going to comp next week, so I'm never going to be able to build on that. If you learnt those things earlier on, you could really try and empower them to see that holistic view of learning, and you can see that holistic child as well. So the positives of this is that you really ensure that outdoor learning is truly considered in part of delivering the whole curriculum and looking at that progression and that overview across every year group. The negative, of course, is if you just have this, you can think of outdoors as being in isolation and not truly embedded. So if you're just looking at this and you're not seeing how it links into your learning inside, then doesn't really work either. So combination of both of these is really required. The foundation phase, again, you might consider having an outdoor learning plan for your continuous provision. That might be really useful for you. Again, making sure that you change it with your topics. You're not doing exactly the same activity with your water every time. Another way of doing it, again, if you've got learning with your AOLEs in mind, you could just add a column for location, so that every time you think of an activity, it's like, right, where's the best place to put this? And you literally write down the location. And then at the end of your planning, you look back and you go, wait a minute, why are we going inside all the time? And that means you're thinking about it at the time of planning, and you're making sure it's the most relevant place to the teaching that you're doing. Or if you don't want to adapt your form too much, your planning form, you can just add icons to indicate where you would undertake the learning outside as well. Now, the great thing to this is, of course, it prompts you to ask that question, where is the best place to undertake this activity? And it means that you're making the best use of your outdoor space, because you'll actually think, hopefully, literally be like, oh, under the trees at the backyard, or on the yard round by year threes. So you're really thinking about the location, not just outside. The negative is that you may try to place a planned activity outside, which is not necessarily looking at that as the best place for the learning. So you might be trying to force some of the work outside. Right, most of those planning forms are probably familiar to you, or there might be the way in which you plan at the moment. We're now going on to the very different forms of planning if you want to make sure that outdoor learning is really embedded, and the best ways to inspire you to have outdoor learning in a meaningful way in your school grounds. So this way is undertaking planning not on a spreadsheet, but on a map. So all you have to do is print out a map of your school grounds and local learning area. You could do that from Google Earth, that's what this is. And then when you're planning with your skills and your curriculum content that you want to cover next to you, look for locations for teaching the curriculum content you want to cover, and where the skills can be tested and gained. So things whether you can teach it outside, test it outside, or look for examples to exemplify it outside. Now, the positive aspect of this is that you are not just saying, right, what can we teach outside? You are actually looking at the outdoors as a resource to teach. So it really helps you identify the balance of indoor and outdoor activities, because the majority of time you are considering your planning, it's going to be an indoor activity. So this is counter to that. It also makes sure that you use a variety of locations, because when you start doing outdoor learning, you can get your favorite bit of the grounds. And that's the bit you always go to, because it's, you know, it's our little spot. It's a secret garden. It's the willows. It's the forest school area. It's got a name and everybody wants to be there. And therefore, if you're all going there, it can suddenly, you can have a bit of a clash. So it means you can use more of your space. And that means you've got a range of experiences that you're sharing with your learners. You're also sharing the space out amongst all classes. You can also see the space as a prompt to the specific activity, which means that the environment is actually providing the inspiration or providing the resource, or it's the only location where you can do this. So it really is fundamental to that teaching. The negatives, on the other hand, of course, is that you do have to adapt for the weather. So if you've planned something that's going to happen outdoors and the weather really does not allow it to happen, then you may have to shift things around. It also relies on you having a range of locations that you can choose from outside, be that a really diverse outdoor learning space, or you can go off-site and you've got enough staff to get you to these learning locations whenever you want to. And that requires ratios, because hopefully all of your schools have now got a form that's filled in as soon as your learners start, saying that they're allowed to go for the local learning area without having to fill in extra forms. So that takes that away. Ratios, that becomes the next issue. Do you have TAs that you can take out, or parents who will come very quickly if you want them to help you? So if you can go further afield, it does make it easier. But of course, you do need to be adaptable for the weather. The biggest negative here, of course, is it's probably very different from the way that you normally plan. So you really need to, you know, take a bit of a leap of faith to see if this is a way that you can actually inspire it. Now, you don't have to go the whole hog and to do this approach for everything. What you could just do is have a map of your school grounds next to you while you're doing your planning form. So it's almost like that gives you the ideas of where you could go, but you're still completing it on your form. But again, just take what you think will be useful. So this is an actual outdoor learning focus planning sheet. So it's got things like skills on it, again, based on foundation phase here, mainly on forest school activities, but it specifies the outdoor skills, the outdoor songs, and it's all highlighting the fact that these are all happening outside, but there still are a range of activities that require covering curriculum content. Now, the next thing I want to show you is the way that I plan, which is probably very different from the way that you plan, because I only teach outside. So what I do is I actually hopefully go to the location where I'm going to be teaching, or if I can't do that, I visualize the outdoor space. And what I am doing as I do that is I have in the back of my mind the skills or the curriculum content I want to cover, and I look around me as I'm walking, and I look at the outdoors and see what I could teach where and what would provide the resources for teaching in which location. So very hard for me to explain this. So what I've done is I've videoed myself speaking out loud. I don't usually do it talking out loud, doing my walking and planning. So this is a video. It's about 13 minutes. So the sound may not be brilliant, but when I send you the video, I put on a better soundtrack, but unfortunately through Zoom, it has to be you hearing it through my microphone. So I'm just going to put this on for you to hear how and see how I plan in my head for my outdoor learning sessions. Okay, this video, what I'm going to do is just walk you through the planning process that I use. Now, I am teaching completely outside, so all I'm considering is how the outdoors is actually inspiring me to cover the content and the skills I've got in mind I want my learners to actually achieve through this topic. So the topic I'm going to be focusing on is looking at my space or my place. So I'm just going to go through how I would undertake that planning process. And I do that by coming out in the environment and actually looking for inspiration here. Now, when you're starting a topic, of course, you need your learners to input on that. So taking them out, the first thing I'm thinking is to get them to be inspired by this space as well. So I'd go for an explorative walk and just observe how they interact with that space. Ask them some key questions, but get them to start thinking about this space as a place for learning. So we just take a walk around the locations and I'd be prompting a few questions, but also observing how they're interacting with the space and thinking about what questions might be coming up. Once I've got their input, then I'm going to think about where I'm going to get my inspiration from. And previous to taking them out, I'm going to go on my own inspirational walk and I'm going to see what captivates me and what provides me with some inspiration for coming up with ways to teach certain content and certain skills. And that's what I'm going to take you on today. I'm going to take you for my planning walk that I will be undertaking. Now, the first idea I have when I identified looking around this space is to think how this space actually makes them feel. So linking this into the health and wellbeing AOLE, they could look at surveying which part of the school grounds they like and which bits they don't like. And then from that data, we could create some bar graphs or some pictograms, and we could use emojis as well. We could look at turning this into a better way of presenting data by looking at the problems with the bar graphs and using this categorical data, and use this to move on to the use of maps to represent data. Then we could map the emotions using emojis at different locations. So we could drill down into the reasons why different areas create different emotions, and now how these emotions differ from others in their class. And they could follow this up in class, produce a mental map of perception. So if we color-coded a map of moods using a color scheme that they derive for each emotion, then this could feed into creating a piece of artwork depicting the perception of the space in an abstract piece of art. Next, they could start to build their own map out of natural materials that they'll find outside. So they create a representation of the school grounds using those natural materials. They can then transfer that onto a piece of paper, so they've got a visual representation of it, and use it to try and get partners to find locations in the school grounds.
Based on that map that they've created, they can think about how accurate it is, and is there any way we can make it more accurate? And think about OS maps, maybe doing a comparison between the two and see what's different between them. So think about representation of landforms. Have they thought about how they're going to put in things like hills, but also a key? So they've probably got a key if they've done it on a piece of paper. So what have they used for those items? And does it end up getting too busy when they're trying to draw complete perfect versions? Once they've worked out what are the problems with their map and how they can try and improve it, we're talking about accuracy now. So what's the main reason we have maps and why do we have maps? Looking at direction, position, and also distance. So then we start talking about scaling and accuracy in terms of, is that map actually to scale? And how do we make our map correct? Then start to go inside and use a base map used from Google Earth just to get that proper scale map and draw in that base map, and then come outside with that base map and put in those landscape features that aren't possible to see on Google Earth or that are new to your area, and then drawing that on top of your map. And then you create a much more accurate to scale map, which again you can repeat in that activity to try and find those locations to make sure it's much more accurate than your previous map. Then teach about scale if we haven't done that, or revisit scale. And the brilliant way of doing that is you looking at Google Earth and just zooming out and then working out how we can work out the scale of our maps. Once you've got that scaled base map, you can then create the scale of your map or calculate it by looking at some things. So you can either provide some scaffold for this or some differentiation. So for example, if you had a Google image of your school grounds that had a scale of 100 times what's on the ground, then that'd be quite easy to calculate. You can also scaffold learners by giving them some prompts such as, what is the size of the yard on the map? What is the size of the yard in real life? And then offer some obvious features, such as the size of the field. So once they've got a scale, they can draw a scale line underneath the drawing. They can also write a ratio. That can then be evaluated or assessed by using that to create a treasure hunt, treasure trail for their partner. So they use that map to locate specific places where they've hidden something. Their partner then follows it. You can use directional language, so they can follow instructions. They can look at direction in terms of north, south, east, west, or it could be directions turning left, 90 degrees turn to the right, clockwise, anti-clockwise turning. All that directional language you can bring in there. You can also lay some lines, some grid lines onto your map and start bringing in some coordinates or some grid referencing as well. Also, then you could start doing another treasure hunt, finding locations of places using your grid references or your coordinates. So building up those mapping skills, but also you're building up a resource that you can then use again, or you can use it for another year group. Once the maps are perfect, we can use them to teach or revisit area, perimeter, and shape. So on the map, they measure some areas and perimeters and identify some shapes, and then they check the answers by measuring it outside. Then reverse it, measure outside the area and perimeter of the yard, and check against the map. Starting to go a bit further afield than the school grounds, we could come to this spot and start to look at perspective. What is the furthest thing you can see? Estimate the distance to that location. How can we check? So you could give out OS maps of the area, measuring the distance. We could also look at landscape drawing, looking at land use site types such as rural or urban land use, obviously depending on your area. And then we can look at some examples of landscape artists such as Kevin Williams, and looking at some of the colours that he used. And he's been told that he overuses the colour black. So we could think about the colours that you can use in the landscape pictures of him, but also compare it to maybe some of the colours we used in our mood mapping and deciding what black represents. So we're coming back to that health and wellbeing and emotional connection with that sense of place as well. We could also look at other landscape artists such as Gwilym Pritchard landscape drawing pictures, or we could look at Peter Prendergast, which does cubic style, and Cedric Lockwood Morris, who actually lived locally here in Sketty, and he focused on the detail of the plants and the flowers. Students could then create their own landscape portrait of this environment. So they can use within one of the artist's style or create their own style. This view is also really useful to think about changes to this space over time, creating the atmosphere by getting students to sit here, maybe reading accounts of the school grounds being used by American soldiers in the war to billet them, and also accounts of children being evacuated to Gower. So if you read with the learners looking out at this view and point out the locations where the tents were and the road that the children coming from London would have been evacuated down, really will bring it to life. We can then inside get the children to write a letter to an evacuee telling them all about Gower and why it's a great place to come and live. We could create a model of the space in the past along with our little bell tents here. And this could be a large scale challenge. So it could be an independent challenge or working in groups. So they're researching old photos, looking at old maps and culminating in a presentation of what it's like in that time. So talking to the class and maybe taking them for a walk around the school grounds and pointing out where certain things would have been. And really try and use descriptive language to evoke the feeling of the time. What was it like with these American airmen living on this site here? If you've got trees that have been chopped down and you know when they were chopped down, it's great to use this as the going back in time tool. So if you know that this growth line here was 2021, then you can go back in time and find out what the school was like or your grounds were like when this tree was a sapling in this year here. So this is a great resource if you've got a stump that you know when it was actually chopped down, and trying to write a narrative of what it was like to be this tree and go through its whole life and how the landscape around it changed while it was growing up. Back in time further, we can explain the landforms we've got. So why is this hill in the background? Kevin Bryn here. What rock type does it have? Doing a hunt around the school grounds to see if we can find any of the underlying rocks. Then when we do find what's underneath our feet, we could then sort it, categorize it, name it, draw the different rock types, and then that will leave us really nicely into a field trip up onto Kevin Bryn to see the landscape from close up. So again, we could walk from school or we could get a bus, but we can use that journey to revisit and assess our map use, following the map and estimating difference. Once we're on the hill, we can look at contour lines and playing games like Eagle Eye to see how the difference in contours makes it difficult to be seen from the highest point. We could go on a rock hunt, so we'll look in detail at the different rocks, visit King Arthur's Stone and hear about the legends of the stone, looking at the rock type and the geology maps to determine where the rocks from King Arthur's Stone came from, sketch the rock, do some rubbings to see the difference between the textures, looking at shadow and how you can use that to create 3D images. Then we can collect rock samples out on the field and bring them back to school, undertaking a science investigation into the hardness of the different rock types. So we can quartz and calcite by rubbing them with different materials. Then we can relate to the landforms we see and try and work out why these landforms are like this. And they can make their own conglomerate using mud and pebbles, and there's lots of practical things they can do to do with fossils and other stones as well. When we come back to school, we can then also look for any rocks. There's one over there. There we go, I can see one there. So we can see any rocks that might have been from the same place as King Arthur's Stone. How did they get here? Think about the journey of the rock, and that could be some creative writing. The story of the rocks in our school grounds. How did they get here? Were they brought by man? Have they been here for hundreds of years? Were they brought here on top of wooden rollers like they did in the Egyptian times? Or have they been brought here as erratics from glaciation? So again, it's just an imaginative activity to do using the landscape around you as a prompt. So to bring it all together in one big celebration, you could do a big scaled model of this place to provide that sense of space. You could do about the landforms, you could create them, you could also do the houses or the facilities, you could even do a cut through to show the geology underneath, and all that information that they've gathered either over time or at this moment in time brings it all together in this fantastic 3D model that you can then share with other people to show all that stuff that they've discovered in this one model. So this is just me brainstorming as I've been walking around the school grounds. There's a load more we could go into, obviously. So hopefully this is a very different way of planning, but this might give you some ideas of how to get some inspiration from your school grounds to do some outdoor learning and putting it into your planning.
Okay, for this video, what I'm going to do is just walk you through the planning process that I use. Now, I am teaching completely outside, so all I'm considering is how the outdoors is actually inspiring me to cover the content and the skills I've got in mind that I want my learners to actually achieve through this topic. So the topic I'm going to be focusing on is looking at my space or my place. So I'm just going to go through how I would undertake that planning process. And I do that by coming out in the environment and actually looking for inspiration here. Now, when you're starting a topic, of course, you need your learners to input on that. So taking them out, the first thing I'm thinking is to get them to be inspired by this space as well. So I'd go for an explorative walk and just observe how they interact with that space. Ask them some key questions, but get them to start thinking about this space as a place for learning. So we'd just take a walk around the locations and I'd be prompting a few questions, but also observing how they're interacting with the space and thinking about what questions might be coming up. Once I've got their input, then I'm going to think about where I'm going to get my inspiration from. And previous to taking them out, I'm going to go on my own inspirational walk and I'm going to see what captivates me and what provides me with some inspiration for coming up with ways to teach certain content and certain skills. And that's what I'm going to take you on today. I'm going to take you for my planning walk that I will be undertaking. Now, the first idea I have when I identified looking around this space is to think how this space actually makes them feel. So linking this into the health and well-being AOLE, they could look at surveying which part of the school grounds they like and which bits they don't like. And then from that data, we could create some bar graphs or some pictograms, and we could use emojis as well. We could look at turning this into a better way of presenting data by looking at the problems with the bar graphs and using this categorical data, and use this to move on to the use of maps to represent data. Then we could map the emotions using emojis at different locations. So we could drill down into the reasons why different areas create different emotions, and now how these emotions differ from others in their class. And they could follow this up in class, produce a mental map of perception. So if we color-coded a map of moods using a color scheme that they derive for each emotion, then this could feed into creating a piece of artwork depicting the perception of the space in an abstract piece of art. Next, they could start to build their own map out of natural materials that they'll find outside. So they create a representation of the school grounds using those natural materials. They can then transfer that onto a piece of paper, so they've got a visual representation of it, and use it to try and get partners to find locations in the school grounds. Based on that map that they've created, they can think about how accurate it is, and is there any way we can make it more accurate? And think about OS maps, maybe doing a comparison between the two and see what's different between them. So thinking about representation of landforms, have they thought about how they're going to put in things like hills, but also a key. So they've probably got a key if they've done it on the piece of paper. So what have they used for those items? And does it end up getting too busy when they're trying to draw complete perfect versions? Once they've worked out what are the problems with their map and how they can try and improve it, we're talking about accuracy now. So what's the main reason we have maps and why do we have maps? Looking at direction, position, and also distance. So then we start talking about scaling and accuracy in terms of, is that map actually to scale? And how do we make our map correct? We can then start to go inside and use a base map used from Google Earth just to get that proper scaled map and draw in that base map, and then come outside with that base map and put in those landscape features that aren't possible to see on Google Earth or that are new to your area, and then drawing that on top of your map. And then you create a much more accurate to scale map, which again you can repeat in that activity to try and find those locations to make sure it's much more accurate than your previous map. You can then teach about scale if we haven't done that, or revisit scale. And a brilliant way of doing that is you're looking at Google Earth and just zooming out and then working out how we can work out the scale of our maps. Once you've got that scaled base map, you can then create the scale of your map or calculate it by looking at some things. So you can either provide some scaffold for this or some differentiation. So for example, if you had a Google image of your school grounds that had a scale of 100 times what's on the ground, then that'd be quite easy to calculate. You could also scaffold learners by giving them some prompts, such as what is the size of the yard on the map? What is the size of the yard in real life? And then offer some obvious features, such as the size of the field. So once they've got a scale, they can draw a scale line underneath the drawing. They can also write a ratio. That can then be evaluated or assessed by using that to create a treasure hunt, treasure trail for their partner. So they use that map to locate specific places where they've hidden something. Their partner then follows it. You can use directional language, so they can follow instructions. They can look at direction in terms of north, south, east, west, or it can be directions turning left, 90 degrees turn to the right, clockwise, anti-clockwise turning. All that directional language you can bring in there. You can also lay some lines, some grid lines onto your map and start bringing in some coordinates or some grid referencing as well. Also then you can start doing another treasure hunt, finding locations of places using your grid references or your coordinates. So building up those mapping skills, but also you're building up a resource that you can then use again, or you can use it for another year group. Once the maps are perfect, we can use them to teach or revisit area, perimeter and shape. So on the map, they measure some areas and perimeters and identify some shapes, and then they check the answers by measuring it outside. Then reverse it, measure outside the area and perimeter of the yard and check against the map. Starting to go a bit further afield than the school grounds, we could come to this spot and start to look at perspective. What is the furthest thing you can see? Estimate the distance to that location. How can we check? So you could give out OS maps of the area, measuring the distance. We could also look at landscape drawing, looking at land use site types such as rural or urban land use, obviously depending on your area. And then we could look at some examples of landscape artists such as Kevin Williams and looking at some of the colours that he used. And he's been told that he overuses the colour black. So we could think about the colours that you can use in the landscape pictures of him, but also compare it to maybe some of the colours we used in our mood mapping and deciding what black represents. So we're coming back to that health and well-being and emotional connection with that sense of place as well. We can also look at other landscape artists such as Gwilym Pritchard landscape drawing pictures, or we could look at Peter Prendergast, which does cubic style, and Cedric Lockwood Morris, who actually lived locally here in Sketty, and he focused on the detail of the plants and the flowers. The students could then create their own landscape portrait of this environment. So they can use within one of the artist's style or create their own style. This view is also really useful to think about changes to this space over time. Creating that atmosphere by getting students to sit here maybe and reading accounts of the school grounds being used by American soldiers in the war to billet them, and also accounts of children being evacuated to Gower. So if you read with the learners looking out at this view and point out the locations where the tents were and the road that the children coming from London would have been evacuated down, really will bring it to life. We can then inside get the children to write a letter to an evacuee telling them all about Gower and why it's a great place to come and live. We could create a model of the space in the past along with our little bell tents here. And this could be a large-scale challenge, so it could be an independent challenge or working in groups. So they're researching old photos, looking at old maps and culminating in a presentation of what it's like in that time. So talking to the class and maybe taking them for a walk around the school grounds and pointing out where certain things would have been. And really try and use descriptive language to evoke the feeling of the time. What was it like with these American airmen living on this site here? If you've got trees that have been chopped down and you know when they were chopped down, it's great to use this as the going back in time tool. So if you know that this growth line here was 2021, then you can go back in time and find out what the school was like or your grounds were like when this tree was a sapling in this year here. So this is a great resource if you've got a stump that you know when it was actually chopped down. And trying to write a narrative of what it was like to be this tree and go through its whole life and how the landscape around it changed while it was growing up. Back in time further, we can explain the landforms we've got. So why is this hill in the background Kevin Bryn here? What rock type does it have? Doing a hunt around the school grounds to see if we can find any of the underlying rocks. Then when we do find what's underneath our feet, we could then sort it, categorize it, name it, draw the different rock types, and then that will leave us really nicely into a field trip up onto Kevin Bryn to see the landscape from close up. So again, we could walk from school or we could get a bus, but we can use that journey to revisit and assess our map use, following the map and estimating difference. Once we're on the hill, we can look at contour lines and playing games like Eagle Eye to see how the difference in contours makes it difficult to be seen from the highest point. We could go on a rock hunt, so we'll look in detail at the different rocks, visit King Arthur's stone and hear about the legends of the stone, looking at the rock type and the geology maps to determine where the rocks from King Arthur's stone came from. Sketch the rock, do some rubbings to see the difference between the textures, looking at shadow and how you can use that to create 3D images. Then we can collect rock samples out on the field and bring them back to school, undertaking a science investigation into the hardness of the different rock types. So we could quartz and calcite by rubbing them with different materials. Then we can relate to the landforms we see and try and work out why these landforms are like this. And they can make their own conglomerate using mud and pebbles, and there's lots of practical things they can do to do with fossils and other stones as well. When we come back to school, we can then also look for any rocks. There's one over there. There we go, I can see one there. So we can see any rocks that might have been from the same place as King Arthur's stone. How did they get here? Think about the journey of the rock, and that could be some creative writing, the story of the rocks in our school grounds. How did they get here? Were they brought by man? Have they been here for hundreds of years? Were they brought here on top of wooden rollers like they did in the Egyptian times? Or have they been brought here as erratics from glaciation? So again, it's just an imaginative activity to do using the landscape around you as a prompt. So to bring it all together in one big celebration, you could do a big scaled model of this place to provide that sense of space. You could do about the landforms, you could create them, you could also do the houses or the facilities, you could even do a cut through to show the geology underneath, and all that information that they've gathered either over time or at this moment in time brings it all together in this fantastic 3D model that you can then share with other people to show all that stuff that they've discovered in this one model. So this is just me brainstorming as I've been walking around this school grounds. There's a load more we could go into, obviously. So hopefully this is a very different way of planning, but this might give you some ideas of how to get some inspiration from your school grounds to do some outdoor learning and putting it into your planning.
Okay, fantastic. Right, so hopefully that was useful. I heard some really useful conversations anyway, so it's always great to share ideas with other people in different situations and different outdoor spaces as well. So just got a few more slides I'm going to share. There was a message in the chat that I saw when I was having a look asking about recordings. Yes, once this session is finished, I will get the recording and I will embed it into the PowerPoint and I'll send it to you, so you will have a recording of this. So if you want to revisit things, it'll all be there for you. So this slide is just to explain that in terms of outdoor learning, I know the similar thing does happen inside, but it's almost more so that it happens outdoors, is that you get unscheduled events that lead to a really great learning experience. I had one once that I was doing a field trip on a beach and we were doing the weather, and something amazing happened that had absolutely no link to the weather, but I just couldn't let it go. So when this school arrived from Cardiff, I said, look, I know we're doing the weather, but there is a baby minke whale that has just been found dead on the beach up there, and I don't think your learners will ever see one, and I haven't seen one. Can we please go and see it? So we went and saw it, and it was amazing. And they were actually doing a autopsy, which I would have loved to go and watch, but we did have to go and do some weather teaching stuff. But whenever I go back to that school and they come out to see me, that's all they remember is the minke whale. And some of these opportunities you shouldn't ignore. We've had times when we found lots of dead sharks, which usually are associated with what you're doing because it's on the beach. We've also found hedgehogs that we had to rescue, and things like this can opportunities that you can really grasp and say, right, we're going to go with this. You know, my plan, my learning objective was great, but this is better. Then just allowing some time, some free time for your learners to explore, and sometimes really get them to discover and engage with the natural world, this new excitement with these new possibilities. So don't be afraid of going off on a tangent and create a new learning objective based on what you actually undertook, not what you did at the first place. Hopefully, Estin is going much less pushy about the outdoor learning, about the objective of the lesson. As long as it's there somewhere, it doesn't have to be something at the top of the page underlined twice. It could be something that you almost come up with at the end of the session based on what you did. So go for planned spontaneity. So again, depending on the weather, it could be that the weather gets better and it improves, you go outside. It could be that it gets really bad and you think, right, let's go out and see if we can do this. How's this going to work? So what I want to go through last is some specifics on how to plan an outdoor learning session. So a short-term one. So again, when you're planning an outdoor activity, you need to really consider what you're going to achieve by going outside, what your desired learning outcomes are, and then what the focus is on there before you think about what the activities are. So you think about what you're trying to aim, what your learners are going to learn in terms of a skill or context. That should be the driving force to you coming up with the activities. And then when you're thinking about the structure and the teaching methods that you're going to use in the session, think about what themes or approaches or pedagogies that you use indoors that works really well with your learners that you can then extend outside. So all of that teaching, all those teaching skills that you have are all transferable to the outdoors. So whatever works with your learners inside, take it outside and use it outside. So what should you include in an outdoor learning session? Now, of course, when you've been teaching for a long time, you don't write individual lesson plans and you don't have to. But if you were doing an outdoor learning lesson, you might think, right, okay, we need a bit more support here. I want a bit more scaffolding as to what I'm doing. So I know that I feel prepared and I've got the equipment and I've got the plan in place. So you might want to be a bit more structured in your short-term planning for this. So use a short-term planning sheet if you want, but if you're using one for the indoors, again, just take it outside, use it for the outdoors. Do not reinvent a new planning system or sheet for what you do outside. Use the same one or the same thing as you do inside. And if it's just part of a lesson that you're doing outside, a small 5-minute session, just put it on that learning that you do in your short-term planning anyway. And so here's a list of what I think you should include in it. Obviously, your learning objective, how the learning links to your pre-visit and your post work, the pedagogies you're going to be using, what supervision style you're going to be hands-on, you're going to be observing, what plenary you're going to use, what assessment for learning you're going to use, what follow-up work you're going to use, and what evaluation you're going to use. Sound familiar? It's exactly the same as what you do in class. So again, just transfer it outside from your indoor learning. And here, just to help you if you are struggling, is a outdoor learning planning sheet for a class that I've created that you could use to fill in, covering the full purposes and cross-curricular and everything as well. So last thing, yes, just checking. Last thing, again, if you want to embed your outdoor learning into your planning, you really want to have some systemic changes probably to ensure that your embedded outdoor learning can't be just you doing it. You really want it to be done as a school. So this is a whole nother session, but really realistically, if you want to make sure your outdoor learning is effective and your learners are good at being outdoor learning, you really need to make the outdoors part of your routine. So if you're doing that, pick a day of the week, muddy Monday, welly Wednesday, great, means you're going up every week. It's going to be embedded then. That's a really simple way to get your learners regularly going outside. You also need to really move away from the idea that being outside is for early years or for PE or for any specific subject. Thinking about taking the learners outside for every age group, Key Stage 2 as well, and it should be fully embedded. Thinking about using the outdoors for your homework or your home learning. So is there a way in which you could promote it beyond the school gates? Now, over lockdown, I started a YouTube channel and did outdoor learning challenges for using your garden for teaching. And all of those are available on my YouTube channel. And those would make great homework tasks that you can do. Again, promoting them going outside using their outdoor space, and none of them require a great garden. It's just going outside. And if your students choose their homework task, which a lot of schools are doing now, again, it's a marvelous way to include some outdoor learning opportunities to promote learning in nature. And even some schools are creating award schemes for outdoor learning skills that you can develop. Also, a lot of schools are going down the challenge card route or the missions route, especially in an afternoon. I've created a set of outdoor challenge cards, which are all based on the 6 AOLEs, and they were written for Key Stage 2 for independent learning across all curricular content. But some schools are using it for foundation phase and some are using it as topic bases. And again, that's an easy way of integrating some outdoor learning into your weekly use of your curriculum. Find experts inside your school. So it's amazing how much talent you might find within your families or your staff. Sometimes you just have to ask. So surveying them, asking grandparents if they are enthusiastic about something. It could be gardening, it could be anything at all that's to do with outside or even the wider area. And then you can invite them in, especially now we're having visitors in, fantastic. So they can be volunteers, they could do a talk, they could just show things, or they could run clubs, depending on how enthusiastic they are. And if they don't want to come in, they could write a video, do a video and then send that in as well. And then really, again, if it's not just on one person, it's never going to work if it's just one person beating the drum. So set the culture for learning outside as a non-negotiable, integral part of your school life. Put it in your policies, put it in your uniform policy that you need to have wellies and waterproofs in school. Put it as part of something that you do on a weekly basis so that when your parents come and say, well, they were dirty, you're like, yeah, this is part of our learning. This is what we do. And then lastly, deeply embedding outdoor learning into your school, is much more like surviving the shifting sands. Again, every time something changes, the curriculum changes, the staff changes, if it's not embedded and your forest school leader or your outdoor learning leader has gone, suddenly, oh, they did the outdoor learning. We don't do it anymore because, oh, it was their job. So make sure it's in your management systems, it's into your school development plan, and put it into your organizational structures so that you know that it's going to be surviving any staff moving around. And then really, for outdoor learning to be a success, you really, hopefully this training has showed you that you can't just bolt it onto your existing lessons. You really need to think about how to fully embed it and make it an integral part of the school day. So that way it's going to be really a genuine success across your school. So I'm going to leave you with this. If you want to think about something to do, think about ways in which you could change your planning forms so that you integrate more outdoor learning into it, and some resources to keep you going. This is the link to my outdoor learning challenge cards, which are available on the Nature Days website. They're £50 for 50 cards, and you get a digital download so you can use them for the whole of your school. I'm starting up a subscription service, so there's going to be outdoor learning activities and ideas for the Welsh curriculum there as well. I've got the Padlet, which I will share with you now. I need to stop this share though first and start another share. So this is available online. So if you have a look, you've got all of the different AOLEs and everything to do outdoor learning. Each one of those is a link to either a document that I've created or to a resource online. So loads of information there. Stop that. And lastly, if you do have any questions, you're very welcome to come and share. If you want to give me feedback, that'd be fantastic. There's a QR code there. You can scan that and there's an online feedback form. The second QR code is the Padlet that you can scan on. This session is actually part of 20 sessions that I've been doing to integrate outdoor learning into the curriculum for Wales. It's been going on for the whole year. If you've missed any of them, then they're all available to buy for £10 each on Next Day's website. I've also got some other ones coming up. The next one in the series, so section 16, is looking at how to undertake field trips, so how to go further afield. That's on the 8th of June after half term. But I'm also doing a 2-hour session, which is going to be very fast and furious, trying to cover 6 of the sessions I did before in one, which is ideas for teaching all of the 6 AOLEs using outdoors. So how to cover the whole of the curriculum for Wales using the outdoors as a resource. So we're just over 1 minute. I do apologize. If anybody has any questions, if you would like to stick around, you're very welcome to. If not, thank you so much. I will send you the recording, and the PowerPoint will have the recording embedded in it as soon as I've done it. And if you have any feedback, please do fill in the feedback forms or stay online and put anything in the chat. So I will keep the chat and I'll send you the recording to whichever email you've mentioned or the one you booked it on. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope to see you at another training session soon.